Hey guys, Adam here with Anabolic Climbing, and today we are going to go through the hilariously short history of steroids in rock climbing. So you might think pretty easily that, there haven't been that many cases of steroids in rock climbing. There are certainly almost none publicized outside of the one IFSC ban from April of last year. And it might be easy to conclude that given how old our sport is and that there have been basically no folks, for the most part, documenting their case in steroids, that it just doesn't exist in our sport. And I don't know if that's inconclusive, but I want to go with the 3 documented cases that we have right now, what their outcomes were, what their takes were, and if in the case we know what compounds they took, if it made sense given their goals in climbing. So before we begin, I want to talk about what it is that you would look to gain from steroids in rock climbing. And I think the first and most obvious is recovery. Rock climbing is pretty brutal. So being able to get a 5th day in the gym or on your outdoor project would mean a lot, especially as a high-level climber. The other, which is pretty obvious, would be strength. Being able to pull that much harder makes a lot of sense for either being able to get that dyno, being able to pull that, or being able to make that last crux move, being able to hold on and not peel off. So on paper, it makes sense why PEDs in rock climbing, in theory, would see more use. And now let's talk about why they don't, and why I feel pretty confident saying the majority of rock climbers that are asking these questions are not willing to take the next step. And the first and foremost is potentially compromised tendon health. I think a lot of rock climbers read this and sort of stop right there, and that's understandable. Tendons are literally how we get all of our connective tissue working. If we were to have a tendon or pulley injury, that would be a disaster. So it makes a lot of sense that at face value, most climbers just see that and stop away. The other part is, steroids are not side effect free. You would have acne, potential hair loss, potential liver kidney damage, heart growth, blood pressure and lipid changes. And the dosing around steroids, at least in our community, is essentially unknown. I have checked on these questions since I started climbing about 6 years ago, and I have not seen the conversation really taken forward since. So as I've been climbing more and as I've been more curious about pharmacology, I want to take on some of this stuff myself. The other part, and I think this makes sense too, is every ounce of weight that we have to drag up the wall. So if I weigh 157 now and I'm able to bulk up to 165, that might give me a higher strength amount, but it's also more weight that I have to pull up the wall. As you climb in higher grades, it would make a lot of sense that would be deleterious to your overall performance. So with that said, I have 3 examples of climbers who have gone on the record with their steroid use, and I just want to go and talk about them very briefly. The middle will really just be a footnote, but let's start with John Long in the 60s and 70s. First off, absolutely huge John Long fan. Had a chance to briefly catch him at Recreation. Could not be a nicer dude. But let's see what he said about his steroid use. But I'll tell you one thing for sure. Interesting, and that is there's a reason why those are illegal. And I discovered why. And it's not because they don't work. I mean, you get strong as a frickin' black bear on those things in no time. It is absolutely crazy how strong you get on those. And I was doing a fairly moderate dose, nothing over the top. I quit after 1 cycle. So, given the timeline, we can kind of speculate what was legal at the time and what are the things that John might have been doing. I have reached out to John, hasn't gotten back. If he does, I will absolutely update this. But my guess it's either Dianabol or testosterone. And doing low-dose testosterone, I think, makes a whole bunch of sense. Testosterone on its own is bioidentical, meaning your body endogenously produces it. And testosterone doesn't really have any negative downsides to tendon health. So it would make sense that you'd get super strong, super muscular on testosterone without really risking tendons directly. Indirectly, though, there is a case to be made. So the reason I say indirectly is because you're going to put muscle on way faster than you're going to be able to grow your tendons. So let's say I grow my muscle by 10, 15, maybe even 20 pounds over the course of a year, or rather my muscle, and my tendons don't catch up in time. It does put me at a higher risk for tendon injury, pulley injury, and that's why you see bodybuilders, if they're smart, raise their volume from lower rep ranges to higher rep ranges to minimize the impact on the tendons. And I think that's good practice. John only did one cycle, so we don't really have too much data on it. This is all anecdotal. But, he kind of says it right there. It does make you strong, and we're aware that steroids are efficacious. We just don't know if they're efficacious for us. I also think that there's a reasonable question to be had about if steroids might be better for crack climbers versus folks that are doing sport routes or trad routes or potentially boulders, but we'll get to that at a later video. The other brief footnote, Tommy Caldwell's dad, Mike, and the reason is not because he was trying to be the best rock climber he could, or because he was Mr. Colorado. And shout out to that absolute stud. Tommy Caldwell is my hero. Mike, you are an absolute legend. Thank you for your contributions to the sport. Cheers, bro. And the last one, and this is probably the most curious and the one I want to talk about in some detail, is Reza Kolasangian. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. And Reza is an absolute stud. You could see him here doing one-finger pull-ups. Back is absolute diced. My God, what an absolute specimen. Reza's a savage. And the reason I bring up Reza is he was popped for steroids in April of 2024. So I believe he tested positive for Winstrol, which is somewhat common in combat sports. You will see it in weightlifters. It's actually mostly used in horses in the PED context. But on paper, at face value, it might make some sense why a climber would want to run Winstrol, but I promise you do not, and I'll tell you why. While it is notorious for drying you out, giving you a dry, grainy look, lowering your water retention, so you'd think that would be pretty optimal for climbing, the issue really surrounds its impact on collagen synthesis. If you talk to any bodybuilder that runs Winstrol, I actually think this happened to Dorian Yates, I'll confirm that later, is you start to really lower your estrogen amounts, which has an impact on collagen synthesis. And while you are producing more collagen, the quality of the lattices of the tendons actually gets compromised. So you're lowering your estrogen, you're lowering the quality of your connective tissue, and the likelihood of a torn tendon goes through the roof. That's why Dorian probably had a couple of really rough injuries going into his Olympia. And I'm not making this up. You can go through PubMed, and it actually does discuss the compromised state of folks' tendons. A lot of guys that use Winstrol will talk about their tendons feeling like glass. 22% of the anabolic androgenic steroid users reported lifetime tendon rupture, which is only 3 reported tendon ruptures. But the majority of them have spoken about compromised tendon quality, which is not ideal, particularly for climbing. And the reason I know this is if you look at Reza's last rankings, when he presumably was on the sauce, are dramatically worse than, I would say, the lion's share of his competitions. Does that mean that the Iranian team may be using steroids? I don't know. I wouldn't make that accusation. No one else from their team is popped, and while some of their speed climbers look pretty jacked, a team using such poor compound selection seems pretty ridiculous to me. It's not to say that it's not possible, but I will say that it's way less likely than it otherwise would be. So, yeah, that's all of the documented cases I was able to find on climbing in steroids. I will be looking for more. I will be testing out other compounds going into next year. I'll talk about more about those in other videos. But I kind of want to set the stage that, yes, we know steroids work. There are positive outcomes and negative outcomes. What we're really looking for within our anabolic use is improved recovery, improved strength, but our compound selection needs to be really mindful of tendon health, not growing too fast too quick, and more importantly, the health markers, lowering the doses so that we don't have any negative outcomes from our health, because without that, we're not really making any progress in climbing your life in general. But if John, one of the all-time climbing legends, is aware that it makes you strong as a black bear and was able to improve his climbing at a low dose, and I think he's right on the money here, it's really a positive outlook for us on the sport. Last thing I want to mention, if you're a kid, don't touch gear. You don't need to wreck your endocrine system. If you're a little bit older, if you're even thinking about stuff like this, please contact the doctor. If you have any anecdotal experience with steroids in your rock climbing or testosterone replacement therapy or being on growth hormone, please feel free to email me or reach out in the comment section. And yeah, I'm Adam with Anabolic Climbing. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys soon.